The sound of tearing fabric echoed through the marble hallway like a gunshot, sharp and humiliating, freezing everyone in place. In that single, cruel second, a young maid stood trembling, clutching the torn remains of her uniform while the millionaire's son smirked in careless arrogance. What happened next would shatter pride, expose hidden wounds, and change every life inside that mansion forever. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and standing up for those who have no voice, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe to the channel. Comment below where you're watching from and whether you think people truly change. Your support keeps these stories alive. The mansion stood tall on a quiet hillside, its white pillars gleaming beneath the afternoon sun. Inside, polished floors reflected crystal chandeliers, and the air smelled faintly of imported roses. To the outside world, it was a symbol of perfection and power. But behind those grand doors, not every heart felt grand. 19-year-old Aisha moved quietly through the corridor, her head slightly bowed, her steps careful and practiced. She had been working in the mansion for almost a year. Her uniform was simple, blue cotton, neatly pressed each morning no matter how tired she felt. She wore her dark hair in a low braid, her face free of makeup, her eyes always focused on her tasks. Every stitch of that uniform meant dignity to her. It meant food for her sick mother and school fees for her younger brother. Aisha had grown up in a small rented house on the edge of the city. Her father had passed away when she was 12, leaving her mother to struggle with odd jobs until illness stole her strength. At 16, Aisha left school to become the provider. She learned quickly that wealth could be kind, but it could also be cruel. The owner of the mansion, Mr. Rahman, was one of the most powerful businessmen in the region. His companies spanned real estate, technology, and international trade. People admired him, feared him, envied him. But those who worked closely with him knew he was disciplined, reserved, and surprisingly fair. His son, however, was a different story. 22-year-old Zion had grown up surrounded by privilege. Designer clothes, luxury cars, private tutors, overseas vacations, he had never been denied anything. His confidence often crossed into arrogance, his laughter sometimes sharp with mockery. He was not evil, but he had never truly faced consequences. That afternoon, Aisha was carrying a basket of freshly ironed clothes toward the guest wing. The house was quiet except for distant music drifting from Zion's room. As she turned a corner, she collided with him. The basket tilted, shirt spilling across the polished floor. For a moment, silence. Zion looked down at the scattered clothes and then at Aisha, who immediately bent to gather them, her cheeks burning red. Instead of stepping back, he blocked her path, amusement flickering in his eyes. His friends, visiting from the city, stood a few feet away, watching. Embarrassment turned into something harsher in Zion's expression. Perhaps he felt mocked by his friends for being inconvenienced. Perhaps he simply wanted to display control. In a reckless, immature gesture meant to entertain, he grabbed the sleeve of Aisha's uniform and pulled. The fabric tore with a violent rip, exposing her shoulder. The hallway froze. Aisha gasped, clutching the torn cloth to her chest, her face drained of color. Humiliation flooded her like icy water. She felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. The laughter from one of the friends pierced deeper than the torn fabric. In that moment, she wasn't just a maid. She was a daughter trying to survive. A sister sacrificing her dreams. And now, she stood stripped of dignity in a house where she had worked silently and faithfully. But fate had other plans. From the far end of the corridor, steady footsteps approached. Mr. Rahman had returned earlier than expected from a business meeting. He had entered quietly, intending to head straight to his study. Instead, he witnessed the aftermath, scattered clothes, his son standing stiff, and a young woman trembling, clutching her ripped uniform. The air felt heavy. Mr. Rahman did not shout. He did not storm forward. His silence was more terrifying than anger. He removed his blazer slowly and walked toward Aisha. Without hesitation, he placed it gently around her shoulders, covering the torn fabric. The gesture was firm but tender, shielding her from the staring eyes. Then he turned to his son. There was no rage in his face, only deep disappointment. In a voice steady but filled with weight, he asked what had happened. Zion tried to laugh it off, calling it a joke, an accident. But the torn cloth told a different story. Mr. Rahman's eyes hardened. He had built his empire from nothing. As a young man, he had worked in factories, cleaned offices, and faced humiliation from those richer than him. He knew what it meant to be treated as invisible. He had sworn that if he ever rose to power, he would never forget where he came from. And now, his own son had become the very thing he once despised. The disappointment in Mr. Rahman's eyes shattered something inside Zion. For the first time, he felt small, not powerful. Mr. Rahman dismissed his son's friends immediately and instructed the household staff to escort Aisha to the guest suite so she could change into new clothes. His voice never rose, but the authority in it was unmistakable. When Aisha returned later, dressed in a fresh uniform provided by the housekeeper, she expected to be dismissed from her job. In her experience, trouble rarely favored the poor. Instead, she was called into Mr. Rahman's study. The room smelled of leather and old books. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. She stood near the door, her hands clasped tightly. Mr. Rahman did something unexpected. He apologized. Not as a businessman. Not as a wealthy man trying to protect his reputation. But as a father ashamed of his son's actions. Tears gathered in Aisha's eyes. She had never heard someone powerful apologize to someone like her. Mr. Rahman assured her that her job was secure and that her dignity mattered in his home. He promised that what happened would not be ignored. And he kept his word. That evening, the entire household was called to the main hall. Zion stood beside his father, his posture rigid. The staff watched in confusion. In front of everyone, Mr. Rahman announced that respect was the foundation of his house and that no position, no wealth, and no family name allowed anyone to humiliate another human being. Then he did something that left everyone speechless. He told his son that starting the next day, Zion would work alongside the staff for 1 month. He would wake early, assist in cleaning, serve meals, and handle laundry. Not as punishment alone, but as education. The humiliation Zion had inflicted would now become a lesson in humility. Gasps filled the room. For the first week, Zion struggled. His hands, unaccustomed to labor, blistered. His back ached. He felt the sting of being overlooked and ordered around. But slowly, something shifted. He began to notice Aisha's quiet strength. The way she comforted the elderly cook when her arthritis flared. The way she smiled at the gardener's jokes. The way she worked without complaint, even when exhausted. One morning, as he carried a heavy box of supplies, he saw her pause to send money through her phone. He overheard her softly asking about her mother's medication. The realization struck him hard. Her uniform wasn't just fabric. It was survival. Guilt grew heavier than any box he carried. Weeks passed, and the mansion's atmosphere changed. Zion became quieter, more thoughtful. He started helping without being asked. The staff, once wary, began to see sincerity in his effort. On the final day of the month, Mr. Rahman gathered everyone again. Zion stepped forward, his hands slightly trembling. In front of the entire household, he bowed his head, not dramatically, not for show, but genuinely. He acknowledged his immaturity, his cruelty, and the harm he had caused. He thanked Aisha for her patience and apologized for stripping her of dignity. There were tears in more than one pair of eyes. Aisha felt something unexpected, forgiveness. Not because she forgot the pain, but because she saw change. Mr. Rahman then announced something even more surprising. He had established a scholarship fund for the children of all his employees, starting with Aisha's brother. Education, he said, was the strongest foundation for equality. The staff erupted in quiet, emotional applause. Months later, the mansion felt different. Warmer. More human. Zion enrolled in community outreach programs, volunteering at shelters and schools. He began learning the value of work beyond wealth. Mr. Rahman watched silently, pride slowly replacing disappointment. And Aisha? She saved enough to enroll in evening classes. Her dream of completing her education flickered back to life. The day she received her acceptance letter, she stood in the same hallway where her uniform had once been torn. But this time, she stood taller. The fabric that had ripped that afternoon had stitched together something far greater, a lesson in dignity, accountability, and redemption. Before we reach the end, if this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Your support means everything. And now, a special request, comment the word respect below if you believe no job is small and every human deserves dignity. Because sometimes, the greatest wealth isn't in mansions or money. It's in the courage to admit when you're wrong. It's in the strength to change. It's in a father who chooses principle over pride and a young woman who refuses to let humiliation define her future. In the end, it wasn't the torn uniform that everyone remembered. It was the moment a powerful man wrapped his blazer around a trembling girl and taught his son, and the world, that true class is measured not by status, but by humanity. And that is a lesson worth more than millions.